The envelope landed on the dining table with a soft thud right between the mashed potatoes and the green bean casserole. Sunday dinner at our house had always been sacred. The whole family gathered around the mahogany table that Charles and I had bought 38 years ago when we first moved into this house. But tonight, something felt different. Electric. Dangerous. Brielle sat across from me, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against her wine glass. She'd been unusually quiet during dinner, which should have been my first warning. My daughter-in-law was never quiet. She always had something to say, some comment about the house, the food, or how things should be done differently. But tonight, she just sat there with that strange little smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "What's this?" I asked, looking down at the manila envelope that had suddenly appeared beside my plate. "Open it," Brielle said, her voice carrying a tone I'd never heard before. Cold. Calculating. "Since you're too stupid to notice what's happening in your own house." My son Daniel looked up from his plate, confusion creasing his brow. "Brielle, what are you doing?" Charles shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his fork clattering against his plate. I watched him from the corner of my eye, noting how his face had gone pale, how his hands trembled slightly as he reached for his water glass. "Go ahead, Margaret," Brielle continued, leaning back in her chair like she was settling in to watch a show. "Open it. See what your precious husband has been up to while you've been playing the perfect little housewife." The words hit me like ice water, but I kept my expression neutral. Curious, even. Inside, though, my heart was racing, not from shock, but from anticipation. I'd been waiting for this moment for 3 months. 3 long months of pretending I didn't know, 3 months of smiling at family dinners while my husband and daughter-in-law thought they were so clever. With steady hands, I lifted the envelope's flap and slid out the contents. Photographs. 8 by 10 glossy prints that captured everything in vivid detail. Charles and Brielle in our guest bedroom, Charles and Brielle in what looked like a hotel room, Charles and Brielle kissing passionately in his car. I let out a small gasp, covering my mouth with my free hand. "Oh my God," I whispered, my voice breaking just the right amount. "Charles, how could you?" Daniel's chair scraped against the hardwood floor as he stood up abruptly. "What the hell is going on here?" Charles finally looked up, his eyes meeting mine across the table. I saw guilt there, yes, but also fear. Good. He should be afraid. "Margaret, I can't explain," he started, but Brielle cut him off with a laugh. "What's to explain?" she said, taking a sip of wine, like she didn't have a care in the world. "Your father and I are in love, have been for months, and frankly, it's time everyone knew." The silence that followed was deafening. Charles stared at his wife like he'd never seen her before. Charles looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. And me? I sat there, photographs scattered in front of me, playing the role of the devastated wife to perfection. "I don't understand," Daniel said, his voice hollow. "Brielle, you're my wife. Dad, she's your daughter-in-law. This is sick." Brielle shrugged, completely unmoved by her husband's pain. "These things happen, Daniel. Your father makes me feel alive in ways you never could." I watched my son's face crumble, saw the exact moment his heart broke, and felt a familiar rage building in my chest. But I pushed it down. Not yet. I had to wait for the perfect moment. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. 6 months, Brielle said, with obvious satisfaction. "Maybe longer. Time has a way of blurring when you're truly happy." 6 months. She was lying. Of course, I knew it had been closer to 8 months, because I'd been tracking their affair almost from the beginning. Charles had never been good at hiding things. The unexplained absences, the new cologne, the way he started working out again at 65. And Brielle, well, she thought she was so much smarter than everyone else. "I think I'm going to be sick," I said, standing up slowly. I need some air." "Mom," Daniel started, reaching for me, but I waved him away. "Just give me a minute," I said, walking toward the kitchen on unsteady legs. "I need to process this." But instead of going outside, I stopped just around the corner where I could still hear everything, but they couldn't see me. This was when people revealed their true selves when they thought the wounded party was out of earshot. You didn't have to be so cruel, Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. Oh, please, Brielle replied. Your mother needed to know. She's been walking around here for months playing happy families while her husband was falling in love with someone else. I did her a favor. A favor? Daniel cracked. You destroyed my parents' marriage. You destroyed our marriage. Your parents' marriage was already dead, Brielle said dismissively. And as for ours, well, that was never real to begin with. I heard Charles clear his throat. Brielle, maybe we should. Shut what? She snapped. Pretend this never happened? Charles, we agreed. It's time to stop hiding. I'm tired of sneaking around like some common. You are a common, Daniel said, and I felt a flash of pride at my son's words. Careful, Brielle's voice turned dangerous. You might want to think about how you speak to me. After all, I have more photos, some that might be very interesting to your business partners. Charles told me all about those questionable deals you've been making. My blood ran cold. She was threatening my son now. That changed everything. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened the folder I'd labeled insurance. 3 months of investigation, 3 months of patience, and finally it was time to use what I'd learned. Taking a deep breath, I walked back into the dining room. All three of them looked up as I entered, Brielle still wearing that smug smile. You know what, Brielle? I said, my voice steady now. You're absolutely right. I have been too stupid to notice what was happening in my own house. Her smile widened. Finally, some honesty. Yes, I agreed, pulling out my phone. Finally, I turned the screen toward her. Is this honest enough for you? Brielle's face went white as she stared at the phone. On the screen was a photograph. Not one of Charles and her, but one of her with a man I'd never seen before. A man who definitely wasn't my husband. They were in what looked like the same hotel room from her photos, but this picture was taken just 2 weeks ago. What is... She started, but our voice died in her throat. His name is Julian, I said calmly. Julian Blake. Ring any bells? Brielle's wine glass slipped from her fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor. Red wine spread across the white oak like blood. That's impossible, she whispered. Is it? I asked, scrolling to the next photo, because according to my research, Julian Blake is your husband. Your real husband, the one you married in Nevada 3 years ago, the one you told everyone was dead. And then, like a house of cards collapsing, Brielle's carefully constructed world began to fall apart. Her eyes rolled back, her body swayed, and she crumpled to the floor in a dead faint. As I looked down at her unconscious form, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Satisfaction. The game was just beginning. 3 months earlier, I had been folding laundry in the master bedroom when I heard Charles's phone buzz on the nightstand. He was in the shower, and normally I wouldn't have thought twice about it. But something made me glance over, and what I saw on the lock screen made my blood freeze. Can't wait to feel you inside me again, B. 42 years of marriage. And this was how I discovered my husband was cheating? Not through some dramatic confrontation or suspicious behavior I'd been tracking for months. Just a simple text message that appeared at exactly the wrong moment. My hands shook as I set down the towel I'd been folding. B. There was only one person in our lives with that initial who would send such a message. Brielle. My daughter-in-law. The woman who'd been sitting at my dinner table for the past 2 years, eating my food, accepting my kindness, all while planning to destroy my family. I sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, my mind racing. How long had this been going on? How many family gatherings had I hosted while they exchanged secret glances? How many times had I welcomed her into my home while she was sleeping with my husband? The shower was still running. Charles's phone buzzed again. Charles forgot his phone, I called out, my voice surprisingly steady. I'll just leave it here. But instead of leaving it, I picked it up. Charles had never been particularly tech-savvy, His password was still our anniversary date, just like it had been for years. My fingers trembled as I entered the numbers. 08151981. The phone unlocked. What I found in his messages made me physically ill. Months of correspondence, intimate photos, detailed plans for secret meetings, and worse, conversations about me. About how I was getting old and letting myself go. About how I was boring and predictable. But it was the most recent conversation that really caught my attention. Brielle had sent a screenshot of what looked like a marriage certificate, but something about it seemed wrong. The quality was poor, pixelated, and when I zoomed in, I could see subtle inconsistencies in the font. That's weird, I whispered to myself, screenshotting the image before Charles finished his shower. The next morning, while Charles was at his golf game and Daniel was at work, I found myself alone with Brielle for the first time since discovering the affair. She'd come over to drop off some books she'd borrowed, and I watched her carefully as she moved through my kitchen like she owned it. "Coffee?" I offered, keeping my voice light and friendly. "Sure," she said, not even looking at me as she scrolled through her phone. "Make it strong. I barely slept last night." "I bet you didn't," I thought, but smiled sweetly instead. "Oh, everything okay?" She glanced up then, and for just a moment, I caught something in her expression. Guilt, maybe. Or calculation. "Just thinking about things," she said vaguely. "You know how it is." No, I didn't know how it was. I didn't know how it felt to betray someone who'd welcomed me into their family, but I nodded anyway. "Brielle," I said carefully, handing her the coffee, "I was looking at family photos the other day, and I realized we don't have any pictures from your first wedding to Julian." The coffee mug slipped from her hands, crashing to the floor and sending ceramic shards and hot liquid everywhere. She said, jumping back. "Sorry I'm so clumsy today." But I'd seen her face in that split second before the mug fell. Terror. Pure, undiluted terror. "Don't worry about it," I said, grabbing paper towels. "These things happen. But about those photos." "Julian died in a car accident," she said quickly, crouching down to help clean up the mess. "It's too painful to look at pictures of him." "Of course," I said softly. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to bring up painful memories." But as we cleaned up the coffee together, I was already planning my next move. Something about Brielle's story had never quite added up. She'd appeared in Daniel's life suddenly, with very little history, and while I'd attributed that to grief over her deceased husband, now I wondered if there might be another explanation. That afternoon, I did something I never thought I would do. I hired a private investigator. Patrick Bennett came highly recommended, and his office was small but professional. He listened patiently as I explained the situation, taking notes in a small leather notebook. "What exactly are you hoping to find, Mrs. Patterson?" he asked when I finished. "The truth," I said simply, "about who Brielle really is and whether Julian Blake is really dead." It took Patrick 3 weeks to uncover what he called preliminary findings. But when he called me to his office, his expression was grim. "Mrs. Patterson," he said, sliding a folder across his desk, "I think you need to see this." Inside the folder were photographs, documents, and printouts that painted a picture I never could have imagined. Julian Blake wasn't dead. He was very much alive and living in Phoenix, Arizona. He was also, according to the official documents Patrick had obtained, still married to Brielle. "She's a bigamist," Patrick explained, pointing to the marriage certificates. "She married your son while still legally married to Mr. Blake, but that's not the worst part." They flipped to another section of the file, revealing bank statements and credit reports. "She's done this before," he continued, "at least twice that I can confirm. She targets older men, usually married men with money, seduces them, and then disappears with whatever she can take. Mr. Blake lost his house, his savings, even his business because of her." I stared at the evidence in front of me, feeling sick. "She's a con artist, a very good one," Patrick agreed. "She changes her name, her backstory, even her appearance slightly each time, but she always uses variations of the same identity. Emily, Emma, Brielle, and she always claims to be a widow." "What about Charles?" I asked. "My husband, is he just another Mark?" Patrick hesitated. "I think it started that way, but from what I can tell, she's been planning something bigger with your family. She's been collecting information about your son's business, your financial situation, even your property holdings." My hands clutched into fists. She wasn't just destroying my marriage. She was planning to destroy everything we'd built. "There's more," Patrick said quietly. "Mr. Blake has been looking for her. He wants to press charges for theft and fraud. And the other men she's conned, they're all willing to testify if it comes to that." I looked down at the photographs of Julian Blake. He was younger than Charles, maybe in his 50s, with kind eyes and graying temples. In one photo, he was holding a picture of Brielle, but she looked different somehow. Softer, less calculating. "Can you arrange a meeting?" I asked suddenly. Patrick raised an eyebrow. "With Mr. Blake?" "Yes. I think he and I need to have a conversation." 2 days later, I found myself in a small coffee shop downtown, waiting for a man I'd never met, but who held the key to exposing my daughter-in-law's true nature. When Julian Blake walked in, I recognized him immediately from the photographs. But what struck me most was how broken he looked, older than his years, with the kind of weariness that comes from betrayal. "Mrs. Patterson," he said, approaching my table cautiously. "Please call me Margaret," I said, standing to shake his hand. "Thank you for coming." As we sat down, I studied his face. There was kindness there and hurt, but also something else. Hope, maybe. "I have to ask," he said after we'd ordered coffee, "is she using the name Brielle now?" "Brielle Thompson Patterson," I confirmed. "She married my son 2 years ago." Julian's face crumpled. "She's married again?" "Of course she is, Mr. Blake," I said gently. "I need you to tell me everything about Brielle, about what she did to you, about who she really is." And so he did. For the next 2 hours, Julian told me about the woman who'd swept into his life 5 years earlier, calling herself Emma, how she'd claimed to be a widow, how she'd been so loving and attentive, how he'd fallen completely under her spell. "She took everything," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "My savings, my house, my business. She even took my mother's jewelry, pieces that had been in my family for generations. And then one morning I woke up, and she was just gone." "Did you go to the police?" "I tried, but she was smart about it. Everything she took, she'd convince me to give her willingly. Gifts, joint accounts, property transfers. Legally, it was all above board. The police said it was a civil matter." I reached across the table and touched his hand. "What if I told you we might be able to stop her together?" Julian looked up, and for the first time since he'd walked in, I saw a spark of something other than defeat in his eyes. "What did you have in mind?" As I explained my plan, I watched hope return to Julian Blake's face. And for the first time since discovering Charles's affair, I felt something other than hurt and anger. I felt powerful. The morning after my meeting with Julian, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. For the first time since discovering Charles's affair, I had a plan, not just to expose Brielle, but to understand exactly how deep her web of lies went, and more importantly, to figure out Charles's role in all of this. I found him in the kitchen reading the newspaper with his morning coffee, looking for all the world like a man without a care, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand trembled slightly as he lifted his cup. Good. He should be nervous. "Charles," I said, pouring myself coffee with deliberate calm, "we need to talk." He looked up, and I caught the flash of panic in his eyes before he masked it with confusion. "About what, dear?" "About Brielle." The newspaper crinkled as his grip tightened. "What about her?" I sat down across from him, studying his face. "How long have you known her real name isn't Brielle Thompson?" The color drained from his face so quickly I thought he might faint. The newspaper fell from his hands, scattering across the kitchen table. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, but his voice was weak, unconvincing. "Her real name is Emily Morrison," I continued, watching his reaction carefully. "Before that, it was Emma Daniels. And her legal name, the one on her marriage certificate to Julian Blake, is Elizabeth Margaret Sawyer." Charles's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "Margaret, you knew," I said, and it wasn't a question. "You knew she was married to someone else, and you knew she was lying about who she was." He buried his face in his hands. "It's not what you think. Then tell me what it is." For a long moment, the only sound in the kitchen was the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Finally, Charles looked up, and I saw something I'd never seen before in my husband's eyes. Genuine fear. "She's blackmailing me," he whispered. Whatever I had been expecting him to say, it wasn't that. "What?" 3 months ago, she came to me with photos, not of us together, but of me from 20 years ago. His voice was shaking now. The Henderson deal. The Henderson deal. I remembered it vaguely. Some property development Charles had been involved with when Daniel was in college. I'd never paid much attention to Charles's business dealings, trusting him to handle everything while I focused on raising our son. What about it? I asked, though I was already starting to piece together the answer. There were irregularities, Charles said, staring down at his hands. Nothing major, just some paperwork that got filed incorrectly, some inspections that were rushed through. Everyone involved knew about it, including the city officials. It was just the way business was done back then. But it wasn't legal. Not technically, no. And if someone were to bring it to light now, with all the new oversight regulations, I could face serious charges. Fraud, bribery, maybe even racketeering if they really wanted to make an example of me. I felt like the floor was shifting beneath my feet. How does Brielle know about this? Charles's laugh was bitter and hollow. She seduced one of the guys who worked on the project, Rick Morrison. He'd kept copies of everything, and when he died last year, she inherited all his files. She knew exactly what she had. So she came to you. She said she'd keep quiet about the Henderson deal if I helped her get close to Daniel. She wanted to marry into our family, gain access to our finances, our social circle. She said it would just be temporary, that she'd disappear after a year or two with enough money to start over somewhere else. And you agreed? What choice did I have? Charles's voice cracked. If those documents came to light, I'd lose everything. The business, our house, our reputation. You and Daniel would be destroyed right along with me. I stared at my husband, this man I'd shared my life with for over 40 decades, and realized I didn't know him at all. So you sacrificed our son's happiness to save yourself. To save all of us, he protested. I thought I could control the situation. I thought I could keep her satisfied with small amounts of money, maybe some jewelry. I never intended for things to go this far. This far meaning sleeping with her? Charles flinched as if I'd slapped him. That wasn't part of the original plan. She seduced me, Margaret. She made me feel young again, desirable. I know how pathetic that sounds, but it's the truth. When did you realize she was planning to take more than just a little money? About a month ago. She started asking questions about Daniel's business, about our investments, about the value of the house. And she wanted me to convince Daniel to make her a partner in his company. That's when I knew I was in over my head. I felt a cold rage building in my chest. And you still said nothing? You were going to let her destroy Daniel's life to save your own skin? I was trying to figure out a way to stop her, Charles said desperately. I swear, Margaret, I was looking for a solution. The only solution you were looking for was in her bed. Charles broke down then, sobbing like a child. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. I watched him cry, and I felt nothing. No sympathy, no urge to comfort him. Just a cold, calculating clarity about what needed to happen next. Charles, I said, my voice steady and calm, you're going to help me stop her. He looked up, wiping his eyes. What? You heard me. You're going to help me expose Brielle for what she really is, and you're going to make sure Daniel is protected from the fallout. I can't. If she releases those documents, she's not going to release anything, I interrupted, because by the time I'm done with her, she's going to have much bigger problems to worry about. Charles stared at me like he'd never seen me before. What are you planning? I stood up, dumping my untouched coffee into the sink. What I should have done the moment I found out about your affair. I'm taking control of this situation. Margaret, please, You don't understand how dangerous she is. She's not just a cheating wife or a gold digger. She's a professional con artist. She's destroyed other families, other men. If you cross her, if I cross her, what? I turned to face him, and whatever he saw in my expression made him shrink back. She'll try to destroy me. Charles, she's already destroyed me. She's taken my husband, manipulated my son, and turned my family into her personal playground. What exactly do I have left? Your freedom, he said quietly. If you do something illegal, I'm not planning to do anything illegal. I'm planning to do something much worse. I'm going to tell the truth. Before Charles could respond, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Patrick Bennett's number. Mrs. Patterson, Patrick said when I answered, I have news about Miss Sawyer, and I think you're going to want to hear this in person. An hour later, I sat in Patrick's office while he spread a new collection of documents across his desk. Charles had begged to come with me, but I'd refused. This was my fight now, and I was going to handle it my way. What did you find? I asked. More victims, Patrick said grimly. A lot more. I've been in contact with law enforcement in 3 states, and it turns out Miss Sawyer has been running the same con for almost 10 years. The pattern is always the same. She targets wealthy, older, married men, seduces them, then uses a combination of blackmail and manipulation to gain access to their finances. How many men? At least 8 that we can confirm, possibly more. And the amounts she's stolen are staggering. We're talking about millions of dollars, Mrs. Patterson. I felt sick. What happened to them? The other men? 2 committed suicide, Patrick said quietly. The others lost everything. Their businesses, their homes, their families. She's very good at making sure the legal responsibility falls on her victims rather than herself. But you said law enforcement is involved. They are. The FBI has been building a case against her for the past year. But she's been careful, very careful. They need something concrete, something that ties all her different identities together and proves criminal intent. What kind of something? Patrick leaned forward. They need her to confess to someone she thinks is safe. I understood immediately. You want me to wear a wire? The FBI agents I've been working with think you're in a unique position. You're the one person who knows her true identity, but whom she still sees as a threat to be eliminated rather than an ally to be manipulated. If you could get her to talk about her other cons, her other identities, she'd incriminate herself. Exactly. But Mrs. Patterson, I have to warn you, this would be extremely dangerous. If she suspects you're working with law enforcement, there's no telling what she might do. I thought about Charles's words, about how dangerous Brielle was, about the 2 men who'd committed suicide rather than face the ruin she'd brought to their lives, about my son, who had no idea that his wife was planning to destroy everything he'd worked for. When do we start? I asked. Patrick smiled for the first time since I'd met him. I'll make the call. The FBI office in downtown Pittsburgh was not what I'd expected. Agent Laura Kim was younger than me by at least 20 years, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that reminded me of myself when I was her age, back when I thought I could take on the world. Her partner, Agent Daniel Ortiz, was older with graying temples and the kind of patience that comes from years of dealing with complicated cases. Mrs. Patterson, Agent Kim said as she led me into a small conference room, I want you to understand exactly what we're asking you to do, and more importantly, what the risks are. I settled into the uncomfortable plastic chair and folded my hands in my lap. I understand the risks. What I want to know is whether this will actually stop her. Agent Ortiz slid a thick folder across the table. This is everything we have on Elizabeth Sawyer, also known as Emily Morrison, Emma Daniels, and now Brielle Thompson. She's been running variations of the same con for almost a decade, and we estimate she's stolen close to $3 million from her victims. I opened the folder and found myself looking at photographs of men I'd never seen before. They all had something in common, though. They looked broken, defeated, Some of the photos appeared to be mugshots. Others looked like they were taken at funerals. These are her victims? I asked. The ones we know about, Agent Kim confirmed. Stephen Avery, age 62, lost his construction business and committed suicide 6 months after she disappeared. Nathaniel Park, no relation to me, lost his savings and his family. He's currently serving time for embezzlement because she convinced him to steal from his own company to fund her lifestyle. I turned the page and found more photos, more stories of destroyed lives. How is she getting away with this? She's extremely careful about how she operates, Agent Ortiz explained. She never technically steals anything. Instead, she manipulates her victims into giving her money willingly. Gifts, investments, joint accounts, and she always makes sure they're complicit in some kind of illegal activity so they can't go to the police without incriminating themselves. Like she's doing with Charles? Exactly. She researches her targets thoroughly before making contact. She knows their weaknesses, their secrets, their vulnerabilities, and she exploits all of them. Agent Kim leaned forward. What makes your situation unique, Mrs. Patterson, is that you discovered her true identity before she completed her con. She's not expecting you to fight back, which gives us an advantage we've never had before. What exactly would I need to do? We'd wire you for sound, Agent Ortiz said. Nothing visible, just a small recording device. Then you'd need to get her to talk about her other cons, her other identities. If we can get her to confess to just one of the previous thefts, we can arrest her and start building a case that connects all her crimes. How am I supposed to get her to confess? Agent Kim smiled grimly. You use the same tactics she's been using on everyone else. You manipulate her. Over the next hour, they explained their plan in detail. I would confront Brielle about her real identity, but instead of threatening to expose her, I would offer to become her partner. I would claim that I was tired of my boring life as a housewife and wanted in on her next con. The idea was to make her feel safe enough to brag about her previous successes. She's narcissistic, Agent Kim explained. Con artists like her can't resist showing off their cleverness to someone they think appreciates their skill. If you approach her as an admirer rather than an enemy, she'll likely tell you everything. It was risky. If Brielle suspected I was working with law enforcement, there was no telling what she might do. But I looked at the photos of her previous victims and I knew I didn't have a choice. When do we do this? I asked. We need a few days to set up the recording equipment and brief you on exactly what to say. In the meantime, you need to act completely normal. Don't let her suspect that anything has changed. Acting normal turned out to be harder than I had expected. That evening, as I prepared dinner for yet another family gathering, I found myself studying every interaction between Brielle and the rest of the family with new eyes. She was good. I had to give her that. She played the role of the loving daughter-in-law perfectly, complimenting my cooking, asking Charles about his golf game, listening attentively as Daniel talked about his work. But now I could see the calculation behind every smile, every laugh, every seemingly innocent question. When she asked Daniel about his latest contracts, she wasn't making conversation. She was gathering intelligence. When she complimented Charles on his new watch, she wasn't being sweet. She was cataloging our assets. "Mom, you seem distracted tonight," Daniel said during dessert, pulling me from my observations. "Just tired," I said, forcing a smile. "It's been a long week." Brielle looked up from her pie, and for just a moment, I caught something in her expression. Suspicion, maybe? Or concern that her carefully laid plans might be in jeopardy? "You have been working yourself pretty hard lately," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Maybe you should take a vacation. Charles was just telling me how much you've always wanted to visit Europe." I met her eyes across the table. "Were you now, Charles?" My husband shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I may have mentioned it." "Oh, how thoughtful of you both to plan my life for me," I said, keeping my tone light, but letting just a hint of steel creep in. "But I'm quite happy where I am. Thank you." Brielle's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course. I just thought it might be nice for you to have some time to yourself to relax." To get me out of the way, she meant. I wondered how many of her previous marks had been encouraged to take convenient vacations at crucial moments in her cons. I'll keep that in mind, I said pleasantly. After dinner, as Brielle and Daniel prepared to leave, she lingered in the kitchen while Daniel said goodbye to Charles in the living room. Margaret, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, can I ask you something? Of course, dear. Have you noticed anything different about Charles lately? He seems stressed. I turned to face her, studying her expression. What kind of different? I don't know. Distracted, worried about something. I'm just concerned about him. He's getting older, and stress can be so dangerous at his age. She was fishing, trying to figure out how much I knew. Or maybe she was laying the groundwork for her next move. I decided to test her. Now that you mention it, I said slowly, he has been acting strange, more secretive than usual. I found some papers in his office the other day that I didn't recognize. Brielle's eyes sharpened with interest. What kind of papers? Legal documents of some kind. I didn't read them carefully, but they looked official. I paused, watching her reaction. There was something about property transfers, I think? That's probably nothing, Brielle said quickly, but I could see the wheels turning in her head. Charles handles a lot of business deals. I'm sure it's just routine paperwork. You're probably right, I'd agreed, although some of the documents looked quite old, like they were from years ago. Brielle went very still. How old? I'm not sure, maybe 20 years. The paper looked yellowed and the typing was different from what you see now. Huh. Brielle said, trying to sound casual, but failing completely. That is strange. Daniel appeared in the doorway then, saving Brielle from having to continue the conversation. Ready to go, hon? Absolutely, she said, her mask of perfect wife sliding back into place. Margaret, thank you for dinner as always. It was delicious. After they left, I found Charles in his study, staring blankly at his computer screen. She's getting nervous, I said, closing the door behind me. Charles looked up, startled. What do you mean, Brielle? She was asking about you, about whether you seemed stressed, and she was very interested when I mentioned finding old legal documents. What old legal documents? I made it up, I said impatiently. The point is, she took the bait. She's worried that you might have kept records of the Henderson deal. Charles paled. If she thinks I have evidence that could incriminate her, she'll accelerate her timeline, I finished, which is exactly what we want. We? I sat down across from his desk, meeting his eyes directly. Charles, in 3 days, I'm going to confront Brielle about who she really is. And when I do, you're going to back me up. Margaret, you can't. It's too dangerous. It's more dangerous to let her continue. She's not just planning to steal money from our family, Charles. She's planning to destroy Daniel completely, just like she's destroyed all the others. And if we don't stop her, his blood will be on our hands. Charles was quiet for a long moment, staring down at his hands. What do you need me to do? When the time comes, I need you to tell Daniel the truth about the blackmail, about how this whole thing started. He needs to understand that none of this is his fault. And what about us? Charles asked quietly. Our marriage. I looked at my husband, this man who had betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible and felt nothing but emptiness where love used to be. I don't know, I said, honestly, but our marriage is the least of our problems right now. 2 days later, Agent Kim called to confirm that everything was ready. The recording device was so small it would be virtually undetectable, and they'd identified the perfect location for the confrontation, a small cafe downtown where they could position surveillance teams without being obvious. Remember, Agent Kim said as she fitted the tiny microphone to my clothing, the goal is to get her talking about her previous cons. Ask her about the other men, about how she convinced them to give her money. Make her think you're impressed by her skill. What if she doesn't believe that I want to partner with her? Then we abort and find another way, Agent Ortiz said firmly. Your safety is our priority, Mrs. Patterson. At any point, if you feel threatened, just say the code word and we'll move in immediately. The code word was butterfly, something I could work into conversation naturally if things went wrong. As I drove to the cafe that afternoon, my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. For 3 months, I'd been living a lie, pretending I didn't know about Charles's affair, pretending I still trusted Brielle. Now I was about to drop that pretense and reveal exactly how much I knew. But I wasn't scared. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I was taking control of my own life. Brielle was already waiting when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with a perfect view of the entire cafe. She had chosen her position carefully, I realized. Somewhere she could see anyone approaching, somewhere she could run if necessary. She was learning to be cautious, but she was about to learn that she wasn't cautious enough. The cafe was busier than I expected for a Tuesday afternoon. Office workers grabbing late lunches, college students hunched over laptops, an elderly couple sharing a piece of cake. Normal people living normal lives, completely unaware that they were about to witness the takedown of a professional con artist. I spotted Brielle immediately. She had chosen a table in the far corner, her back to the wall, wearing dark sunglasses despite being indoors. She looked nervous, which was unusual for her. And all the time I'd known her, I'd never seen Brielle anything less than perfectly composed. "Thank you for meeting me," I said as I slid into the seat across from her. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "Your message was pretty cryptic," she replied, not bothering with pleasantries. "What's this about?" I ordered coffee from the waitress, taking my time, letting the tension build. Somewhere in this cafe, FBI agents were watching, listening, waiting for me to get Brielle to incriminate herself. The tiny recording device felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "It's about Julian," I said finally. Brielle went perfectly still for just a moment. Her carefully maintained mask slipped, and I saw pure terror flash across her face before she recovered. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Julian Blake, your husband, your very much alive husband." Brielle's hand trembled as she reached for her water glass. "Julian is dead." "No, he's not. He's living in Phoenix, working construction, and he's been looking for you for 3 years." I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "Elizabeth." The name hit her like a physical blow. She actually flinched, her sunglasses sliding down her nose enough for me to see her eyes. They were the eyes of a cornered animal. "How did you," she started, then stopped herself. "Find out. It wasn't that hard once I knew what to look for. You're good, Brielle, but you're not perfect. You left traces, enough for someone who knew where to look." Brielle glanced around the cafe, and I could see her calculating exit routes, assessing threats. "What do you want?" "To talk. Really talk. No more lies, no more games. I know who you are, what you've done, and what you're planning to do to my family." "You don't know anything." I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the photos Patrick had given me. Photos of her other victims, other identities, other cons. I turned the screen toward her. "Stephen Avery. Emily Morrison convinced him to embezzle money from his company pension fund. He killed himself rather than face the consequences." I swiped to the next photo. "Nathaniel Park. Emma Daniels got him to liquidate his retirement accounts and his children's college funds. He's currently in prison." With each photo, each name, Brielle seemed to shrink further into herself, but I wasn't done. "Raymond Faulkner. Jennifer Daniels," that's a new one, isn't it? "Convinced him to mortgage his house to fund her investment opportunities. He lost everything and died of a heart attack 6 months later." "Stop," Brielle whispered. "Why? Because it's unpleasant to see the results of your work laid out like this? Because it's easier to pretend these were just business transactions instead of the systematic destruction of human lives?" Brielle suddenly straightened, and when she looked at me again, the mask was firmly back in place. "What do you want, Margaret?" "I want in." Whatever she had been expecting me to say, it wasn't that. "What?" "I want in on whatever you're planning next. I'm tired of being the beautiful wife, the perfect mother-in-law. I'm tired of watching everyone else live interesting lives while I fold laundry and host dinner parties." Brielle stared at me like I'd grown a second head. "You're not serious." "I'm completely serious." And she believed me long enough to confess everything, enough to put her away for life.